Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Eli Klutstein, JPC's Content and Media Director. Almost 2 months passed since the beginning of the war, and the IDF is now operating in another enclave of Hamas in Gaza, this time in the south, the city of Khan Yunis. While 110 hostages have been so far released by the terror organization, many more, 137 of them, are still being held by Hamas. In the Lebanese border, even now, the attacks of Hezbollah and the counterattacks of the IDF didn't develop yet to a full-scale war, though the danger of an escalation always looms. Today, we host again Dr. Eyal Hulata, the most recent National Security Advisor and a Senior International Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who is joining us from the US. I remind everyone that for any question you want to present Dr. Hulata, please use the Q&A box and note your name and your outlet. Hello, Dr. Hulata. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, everybody. As always, I will start with giving the key things that I believe are important to follow right now, and then we'll leave enough time for your questions and address them. I think at this point there are a few things we need to look for as things progress. The first, of course, the operation itself on the ground in Khan Yunis. Israel is deepening its activity. The goal is clear, to be able to meet the objectives that the government has put through. It is imperative to eradicate the leadership of Hamas as a terror organization and its ability to rule Gaza, and that goes through the top leaders of Hamas. This was clear from the outset. They've fled from the north to the south. Khan Yunis is the hometown, so to speak, of both Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed F, and the fact that we're operating there has to do not only with that, but of course a lot of it with that. Regarding the operation, I've been getting questions from various outlets over the last few days about the ability of Israel to operate within the limitation, the guidelines of the international law, and a lot of this has been discussed all the time. Israel is operating according to the international law. There are teams in the IDF that are responsible for that, and the our legal counsel of the government is involved in all of the decisions. And it's important to stress this out because this does not contradict, unfortunately, the fact that there are many civilian unintentional casualties in Gaza. And we've talked about in all of the briefings that I've given you. If we need proof to the fact that Hamas is using his own people as human shields, we get that every day and every week. That does not preclude Israel from the necessity to operate according to the international law. This is why you'll continue to see advance warnings on the places that we're about to operate, even though it gives Hamas the information of where we're going to hit and allows them to maneuver around and to continue to flee from place to place in their hiding. But we'll continue to do so because this is what we should do. This is the way that we conduct the war. The humanitarian aid needs to increase all the time, and there's a lot of emphasis on this. This is also a talking point or issue between the administration, the American administration, the Israeli government, and we should expect to see more efforts, and I think more things to that. We should see more efforts and more action in this regard because the humanitarian situation will continue to be difficult and continue also to deteriorate. The moving of people from Khan Yunis will increase the density of the population in other places in the Strip, and the Strip is not large as enough to contain all of that in the same time. These are all the constraints that Israel needs to work within. So this is one thing to focus. I think we should expect this to wage for a few more weeks, and then a rethinking on the process. First to see how things work in Khan Yunis and how all of the other constraints play around to that. This is point number one that we need to focus on. The second thing that I want to raise in the context of Gaza is the vast amount of details and evidence that have been put out more than before, especially on once since the abducted hostages have been released, their stories start to come out, and we see more conversations also on the UN floor about the sexual crimes that have been conducted in large scales on October 7 on a vast amount. You've also seen the reporting. This is something that was not disclosed, but the spokesman of the State Department put this out, and to my understanding, this is very true. The main reason Hamas did not release the last batch of young women that were hostages is because their stories will be quite horrific and will not be in line with the way that Hamas is trying to portray themselves in this war. Unfortunately, the fact that this even all of those things are out, it's difficult for Israel for the legitimization of what we're doing is an inherent part in this. I think I said this also last week. We knew that once we get into a ground operation in Gaza, it will be devastating. It will be very violent, and that it's actually happening better than my worries. But we knew that this will be very bad. This is one of the reasons that Israel refrained from going into this campaign, even though we had opportunities, or maybe even I cannot talk about the advance warning over the last 10 months. But when I was National Security Advisor and things came about as reasons perhaps to consider this, in the back of my mind, we always thought, well, this is going to be a very bad war. Let's do this only when we have to. Fortunately, we were surprised to do this. But I will raise again the question I think I said also last week. Just imagine what would have happened if Israel did have an advance warning and decided to preemptively attack Gaza on October 6th without knowing that everything that happened on October 7th. How would the legitimacy look like? What would be the international support for that? It's a rhetorical question. Clearly, we will get no legitimacy and international support if it wasn't for that 1,200 people. It just makes you think and wonder how these things are. But in any case, this is how it is. We're Israelis. We know this, and we need to operate within those constraints. Since you are stationed in Israel and you have access to your sources, I just urge you to make sure that your ability to say on whether or not Israel is indeed operating the way I say according to international law is very important. And I think that telling that story right and not letting propaganda coming from Hamas supporters that is trying to flip the narrative on this is important. If I may use this occasion also to suggest something to you. The number 3 point I want to put, of course, has to do with the Iranian involvement. We're talking about this every week and monitoring. Hezbollah has voluntarily abided to the truce on the days it was, and it shouldn't come as a surprise that they intensify the fire once it ended. The fact that we see similar pattern to what we've seen before, I guess, says something about the mindset of Nasrallah. He's not looking for opening a full-fledged war with Israel at this point from his own reasons. Of course, this is also relevant to us. Having said that, Israel must understand, and Israel must also work towards that end. If we will not be able to secure the border, the northern border, when this round of conflict with Hezbollah ends, it will be very difficult for the community to come back to live in their places, in their homes. The fact that the Radwan forces are on the fence is a clear violation of 1701. As Israelis, we tend to not to, be disrespectful for the UN and not to put a lot of emphasis on those resolutions. And the way UNIFIL performs on the ground doesn't even come close to being able to host the responsibilities that were given to him in 1701 and ensuring that the southern part of Lebanon or north to the Israeli border is safe from terrorists and from violence. Clearly, this is not the case almost from the outset. What is important to say is that if there is no international diplomatic way to enforce this, then eventually Israel will need to deal with this militarily. And I would not propose to any government to wait for a surprise attack coming from Hezbollah that will be even more devastating than what we encountered in the south on October 7, just because the border is so much wider and the possibilities of Hezbollah to surprise us are higher. Having seen October 7, we must be cognizant that this is the relative scenario should Hezbollah decide to surprise us. So I'm putting it out there. This is something that I've been talking in many forums. I think it's important to put attention to that. There is an international community responsibility to prevent a war. And we should look at the responsibility of those forces rather than peacekeeping at war preventing, especially the way things have been evolving in the moment in the south. I don't want another war. Israel doesn't want another war. We don't want to invade Lebanon. We don't want to inflict this damage on the Lebanese. But we will not be able to live post October 7 with this option of threats coming from the north. This is for a different time. Israel will not do this now, but hopefully a diplomatic solution can emerge to prevent that from happening. And the fourth point I want to raise is about the day after. There's more discussions on this and more publications on this. And I must say, unfortunately, I don't see the Israeli government engaged in this in enough seriousness and in a meaningful way, because it's difficult politically, it's difficult strategically, but we have to be involved and engaged in this in a very meaningful way, because this could happen hopefully soon if this operation in Khan Yunis is successful and we start the process of removing Hamas from ruling role of Gaza. We have to be equipped with a valuable plan on what to do. Israel should not take a full responsibility of the Gaza Strip, ensuring security for our civilians, and also to ensure that Hamas does not rise again in Gaza. Will be a handful. The civilian governance of Gaza has to be done by Gazans, has to be done by non-Hamas related entities and personnel, and there are people like that in Gaza. It has to be coordinated with the countries around us. The Egyptians will have to play a significant role. My hope is that the Saudis will play a significant role in this. This has been discussed in various capitals already. And this is not something that Israel should leave just for the Americans and the other countries. We must be engaged in this. And I do hope that our government will be engaged more constructively in these dialogues, even though politically this is very difficult for the Prime Minister and the composition of his government. Okay, let's move to the Q&A, Ali.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Hulata, on this. I remind everyone you can use the Q&A box to present your questions. I did want to address one point you mentioned, the issue of the sexual violence that we at JPC, we had a very meaningful briefing on that, and I urge everyone to see it if you haven't done that so far. And we also have contacts for you guys if you want to expand on this issue. I want to touch down on one issue that you mentioned. You mentioned the international law, the role of the international community in general. The ICC prosecutor just visited Israel and called for an investigation into Hamas' probable war crime or possible war crime. And at the same time, we see also in the UN maybe a beginning of movement to denounce those sexual crimes that we just mentioned. Do you think that in general, Israel might need to consider a change in its long policy towards international institutions, and maybe it should start willing to cooperate with the ICC, for instance?
So, the relationship of Israel with the ICC is longstanding. When I was National Security Advisor, this was of one of the things that we dealt with, of course, throughout the time. And I want to just make sure there shouldn't be any comparison between the two sides in this. Hamas is a terror organization. Their existence is a contradiction to the international law, right? Because their sole existence is to go after civilians directly. This is the raison d'être. So it should come as a surprise that the prosecutor prosecutes them. It is a surprise because this hasn't happened before in a meaningful way, and the fact that it is done now, this should be trivial. The fact that the ICC, it's more easier to go after countries like Israel and on Israel specifically. It's because it's always easier, and we've seen this also in interviews in the US. I listen to that all the time. People say, well, Israel is a democracy, and this is why there's a different standard to it. Israel is a democracy. We have a different standard. But this doesn't mean that we need to be unbalancedly addressed by the UN institutions, which are taking advantage of our difficult position and the fact that there is a majority against us all the time. So, as it comes to the ICC, I think that for us to cooperate with the ICC will require more than just opening an investigation on Hamas. This should be almost an immediate thing, no-brainer decision to be made. I don't want to get into that more specifically than this at this point. My hope is that we will not see this kind of criticism on us. I can envision how there will need to be a balanced inquiry on what Hamas did, what Israel did. Israel cannot and shouldn't, and I hope wouldn't play along with something like this. Any comparison between us to a terror organization is repulsive in my mind, and I hope that we won't need to be in such a situation. But this is in the hands of the ICC and the prosecutor, and we'll see how plays his cards on this.
Okay, I have another question from a reporter about the issue of cooperation in the international arena. We heard Turkey talking about Israeli declarations that they will hurt or, hit Hamas operatives and senior operatives in their territory. And should Israel take this into account? And do we have in mind at all any need to reapproach everyone at all from now on?
You mean on Turkey? With Turkey?
Yes. Yes. And
So
Erdogan in
I want to
general.
say a few things. Yeah, I want to say a few things about this. I mean, you know my background, you know where I served. I think that there are things that Israel should do and not talk about, and I would put a period at the end of that sentence. Clearly, we will need to make sure that those people that led Hamas as a terror organization are not able to do this ever again. And we need to do whatever we need to do in this regard. As for Turkey, first of all, unfortunately, Erdogan has chose to burn all of the bridges that we started in the government. I served as national security advisor with them. There was I would call it an olive branch, even though we had no illusions about the intentions. He needed that for political reasons, and it was important for Israel to at least try to normalize again with Turkey. The fact that now he's saying that Hamas is not a terror organization and Israel is a country of terror is just it's mind blowing. He voluntarily decides, I guess, to connect all of the ties with us on this, and this will be the case for that, unfortunately. What I should say is that Turkey and also Qatar and also other countries should be very wary of hosting Hamas leaders, hosting Hamas wealth, which is quite substantial and is held in several places. I just heard that I think the Brits have decided to confiscate Yahya Sinwar's bank accounts, and that is something that is very important and should be done more and more. Those countries should not collaborate with Hamas in any way or form, and those who would will also need to address, I hope, the international community questions and maybe sanctions and other issues by them. What Israel would do, especially in those covert actions, I think we should leave out of public scope and talking.
Okay, we have a question from Yaakov Lapin. He's from the Jewish News Syndicate. He's asking, is the U.S. restraint in face of the Houthi Iranian aggression, is it a problem for the regional U.S.-led, regional order? Will it embolden Iran and its proxies? And I would also want to add, where is the red line that Israel needs to, or the U.S. needs to react very harshly?
So I mean, I would try to be careful in proposing U.S. policy on this. But I want to say two things. First, from an Israeli perspective, what's happening from Yemen is something that we need to be all very, very worried about. It means a lot about the weapons that they have. I think we covered that also last week. The Shihab 2 that they fired in Israel, they do not make that in Yemen, right? They got that from the Iranians. That's a violation of all of the sanction regimes that Iran is being maybe not officially wavered, but de facto wavered on the ballistic missiles. The restrictions in the UN Security Council 2231 have dissolved, and we see that they're feeling very confident in proliferating weapons and knowledge, and we should see more. Also, the fact that they were able to attack a cruise ship from a helicopter while the ship is moving. I mean, you come from various countries. I would check whether or not your militaries can do that. Not many militaries, air forces can do that effectively the way the Houthis did it. And this is the Houthis, right? They were supposed to be this a dispersed organization. They've been trained well by the Iranians, and I think we see the outcomes. For Israel, this is important, but this is not high on our priority list. It's very far. We have good air defense systems, and if they continue to fire Shihabs and cruise missiles, we'll shoot them down. I'm worried about the implications of that for the region. I'm worried for the implications of that for the international stand. I do worry that this is an example of the Houthis, on behalf of the Iranians, responding to an American direct warning coming from President Biden when the war started. He said, "Don't take advantage of this," and they are. He said, "Don't," and they do. And I think this. I know that this is something that the Americans are debating amongst themselves how to react. I think it is very important that there is a decisive response to this. Otherwise, it will just get worse. And if the Houthis are already firing at cruise vessels, they can fire at any ship they want. They can blame that it's Israeli and anyone. By the way, none of them are Israelis. The fact that they're Israelis in the ownership of those shipping companies, what does that mean? Does that mean? I mean, those are all private companies. This has nothing to do with Israel, the country. They will use that as an excuse, and the fact that it's unsafe, not by pirates, but by state-sponsored terror with Iranian weaponry able to shoot at ships sailing there. That's a problem for international trade. I think Israel should not get directly involved in this. This is beyond the scope of our region, but we should be worried that this is continuing without response.
Okay, I have two more questions regarding maybe anti-Semitism and any kind of acts against Israelis in foreign states. So one is following the war, the National Security Council, which you headed, issued a travel warning to Western Europe, and we do want to ask if this is becoming a major problem all over the world, basically, because Western Europe is not the classic space where you would expect this kind of thing. And another question from another journalist is there anything new concerning universities in the US also boycotting Israeli researchers and academics?
Yeah. I'm very worried about those trends, and I'm very worried that people use this war not only because it started the way it started. Of course, this should be a huge reason to be worried that so quickly everything turns this way. And the ban in Israel and the universities. This is not only addressing Israelis. This is I mean, the Jewish communities in the U.S. and in Western Europe feel less safe than they should. And people can tell themselves, "Oh, this is because the policy of Israel." This is not an excuse to be a policy of Israel. The fact that it's not safe to be a Jew in Western Europe and the United States should be a concern, regardless of what Israel does. First, because they live there, they're not Israelis. If they come to Israel, they will be Israelis. They're just Jews. The fact that they support Israel, and some of them don't support Israel, or some of them support some of Israeli policies, some of them don't support some of Israel policies. The fact that they are unsafe, it is unsafe for them, for their kids, for their families to live in Western Europe and in North America and other places in the world, I think should be very alarming. I will leave it at that. I won't go down that avenue any more than that. And that is an issue. I think in general, the liberal world is conflicting with itself about what is just and about what is right. And the fact that it is considered freedom of speech to be pro-Hamas in campuses in the US, but you get banned from positions in the same universities because you express support for Israel. You need to ask yourself, whatever happened to the right of speech, whatever happened to liberalism, what is wrong with a progressive movement that uses those values only when it supports their ideology and beliefs, and puts a lid on other voices. I'm very worried about this. I think this is going the wrong way. I think there's a lot of self-righteousness embedded in this and hypocrisy, and we should all be worried what that means to how Western liberalism works. Now it's related to Israel, so we can say to ourselves, well, it's difficult, and Israel is doing such and such, and so forth. But I live now in the U.S. I see this in other issues that has nothing to do with Israel. That has to do with how political dialogue is conducting, and how tolerance you can have to other views, and how easy it is to label segments just because they are so-called privileged. Uh, um, um, uh, and of course, it is important to recognize that there are issues at the core of this, and there have been oppression of minorities and discrimination of minorities, and they should have rights. And I just want to remind us that Israel is not a minority, but the Jewish people is a minority, and used to be one of those segments, and now it's all completely reversed as it comes to that. But we should be cognizant on the global aspect of those issues, and think they're very worried.
Okay, I want to, before we end our briefing for today, I want to go back to Gaza and to the objectives of the war. Have they changed following the resumption of fire in the south, or is it the same goals that we had in the beginning? And does the effort of the IDF, to protect as much as possible civilians in the ground, like, does that affect its ability to complete these objectives, basically?
Um, the way I want to approach this is that, from my perspective, there is no other way to conduct the war in Gaza. So, even if it would have been, operationally more effective to act otherwise, it's not an option. It's not an option. Israel has to operate within the moral constraints that we took upon ourselves. And the fact that Hamas uses human shields does not allow us to just act irresponsibly completely. Even the large, I mean, the amount of unintentional civilian casualties is higher, also from what I would have wanted to happen during this war. But if Israel was not careful, it would have been much higher. And I'm not calling for that in no way or form. So this is just the way it is. I think what will happen is that it will probably extend the war, because it will take longer until we reach them, as we operate in this way. But there's just no other way from it.
Okay, and do you think the objectives of the war are the same as they were in the beginning of the war?
Yeah, I mean, they should be. As long as Hamas controls Gaza, there's no future for Gaza. There cannot be any new governance in Gaza if they can rise from this war and continue to oppress their own people, and to use the resources to arm themselves again, to create another attack on us. This cannot be the solution. It has to end when Hamas no longer controls of Gaza, one way or another. Hopefully, it can end soon, and that this does not progress to future rounds of war or conflict with Hamas.
Okay, the last question that we got now from a reporter, he's asking about, the thing that the IDF started maybe to do lately, started to funnel seawater into the underground system of tunnels. Do you expect this method to solve the tunnels problem? And can we avoid harming our own civilians, which are being held captive there while we're
Yeah.
doing this, actually?
So, I mean, those are exactly the dilemmas that are there. Israel is very careful as it comes to the hostages, because we want them back alive in large numbers as we can. And there are 8 more women that are waiting to be released, and of course, a lot of men, various ages. There are also, I think, more women that Hamas considers. Some of them are soldiers. Some of them are just in the age of being soldiers that have not been released in the first rounds, and all this is out there. I'm happy to see creative thinking on how to resolve tunnels in ways that are less explosives. This is important, and we'll need to follow and see how this works. The water has a tendency to penetrate again into the soil and back to the sea, because at the end, this is land. This is not concrete on the bottom. Nothing can stay there for a long period of time. But I've been following only from the media of those experiments, even though as a technologist, I'm intrigued to see how this will work, and we'll need to see. But the fact that the IDF is looking for options that are non-lethal, that do not involve bombing from the air to deal with the tunnels is I think a productive and important thing to see.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hulata, and thank you everyone for joining us.
You're
Tomorrow I
welcome.
would want to remind we have another briefing with Mayan Sigal Cohen in Spanish. Her family members have been kidnapped to Gaza. Some were released, and 3:30 tomorrow afternoon, Israel time. I would like to see you there. Thank you
Eli,
very
if I
much.
can add another note,
Sure.
Hanukkah is coming in a few days, and we'll be lighting candles of Hanukkah starting on Thursday. It's the holiday of light, and I heard a very important, I think, message from a friend today regarding this. A small amount of light can take away a large amount of darkness, and I hope that we will see this evolving soon for all of us. So, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.